time she sees you, the bond is permanent, Rylan frowned. You're saying it's more than just remembering a face? It is knowing the soul that kept you alive, the envoy said simply. The girl tilted her head. You're the reason. I am still here. Rylan looked away for a moment, the weight of her words settling on him. He'd been part of countless rescues, but they were usually faces in the chaos people he never saw again. This was different, but before he could speak, the envoy added, such bonds are rare. In our history, they have changed the course of politics, even wars. Rylan met her eyes. You think this could be dangerous? She nodded. For both of us. There are those who will see this connection not as a blessing, but as a tool or a threat. A chime sounded from the envoy's wrist communicator. She read the message, her expression tightening. We will have to continue later. But remember this, if anything happens to her during these talks, the peace will die here. The girl rose to follow her mother, but paused at the door. She looked back at Rylan, her voice soft but certain. I told you. We'd meet again. And then she was gone, leaving Rylan standing in the quiet chamber, more certain than ever that something unseen was already moving against them. Hidden threats. By the third day of talks, Rylan had learned to read the room. The open smiles of the first session were gone. Delegates spoke in clipped tones, voices low, their eyes darting toward the Varen child when they thought no one noticed. She sat quietly beside her mother at the negotiation table, but every so often her gaze would find Rylan across the hall. It wasn't the curious stare of the first day, no. It was watchful. During a break, Rylan stepped out into one of the station's long observation corridors. The glass wall curved outward, showing the endless black of space and the faint shimmer of the planet below. He wanted a moment to clear his head. That's when he heard it, two voices, speaking in hushed tones behind a maintenance panel. He recognized one as belonging to a Varen guard, the other human. The girl's the key, the human voice said. If we get her away from the envoy, the talks collapse. Too many eyes on her, the Varen replied. We wait for the right moment. Raylan's jaw tightened. He took a step closer, but the panel clicked shut and the footsteps retreated in opposite directions. When he returned to the main hall, he noticed more things he hadn't before. A few of the station's cameras had been subtly re-angled. Some guards wore sidearms when they shouldn't have. One security checkpoint had been left unmanned for several minutes. The envoy, still deep in discussion with the human ambassador, didn't notice, or maybe she did, but chose not to show it. The girl, however, seemed to sense the tension. Her violet eyes flicked to the doors, the ceiling, the guards. She looked at Rylan and, for the first time, he saw worry on her face. That night, Rylan returned to his quarters and found a small object resting on the center of his desk. It was a folded piece of thin metal, about the size of his palm. When he opened it, faint etched letters glinted under the room's light. She is not safe here. No signature. No mark, just the warning. He turned it over in his hands, his mind already running through possibilities. If someone wanted to take the girl, it would have to be during the talks, when her mother was distracted, when the room was crowded, and when no one would expect an attack. Raylan slipped the metal note into his pocket. Whatever was coming, he was going to be ready. And if they were going after her, they'd have to go through him first. The kidnapping attempt. The next day began like any other session of the talk's polite smiles, formal greetings, careful words. But Rylan could feel it in the air. The tension had teeth now. Every voice was a little sharper, every glance over the shoulder a little quicker. The girl sat quietly beside her mother, her hands folded neatly on the table. But her gaze wandered, more than usual, scanning the hall the way a soldier might scan a battlefield. The first warning came in the form of a flicker. The station lights dimmed for half a second, nothing unusual, if not for the way the Viren guards' hands twitched toward their weapons at the same time. Then came the second warning. The faint hiss of smoke seeping from a ventilation shaft near the far wall. By the time the third warning hit, the sudden screech of the fire alarm, it was already too late. The doors burst open, and 3 masked figures stormed in, their movements fast and precise. One tossed a smoke canister into the middle of the hall, filling the space with a thick, choking haze. "Get her!" one of them barked. Rylan was already moving. He pushed through the crowd as 2 of the attackers closed in on the girl. One reached for her arm, but Rylan slammed into him shoulder first, sending him sprawling. The other swung a shock baton, but Rylan ducked and drove an elbow into the man's ribs, forcing him to drop the weapon. The girl didn't scream. She just stood frozen, her wide violet eyes locked on Rylan. "Stay behind me," he shouted, planting himself between her and the attackers. A third figure lunged from the side, catching Rylan's arm. The grip was strong, too strong for a normal human. Through the smoke, Rylan caught a glimpse of the man's wrist. Hidden under his sleeve was a thin metal band with alien markings. "Mercenary, you again," the masked man growled. Rylan yanked his arm free and drove his knee into the man's stomach, then grabbed the front of his vest and hurled him into a row of chairs. The smoke was thinning now, and station security was charging in from both sides. The attackers saw their window closing and began to retreat, covering each other as they slipped out through the same door they'd entered. One of them looked back at Rylan as they left, his voice cold and certain. "Next time, she's ours." The doors sealed behind them. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of the fire alarm finally cutting off. Raylan turned to the girl. She was still looking up at him, her hands clenched in the folds of her tunic. Slowly, she stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You kept me safe again," she said quietly. Raylan glanced toward the envoy. She was already speaking urgently to her aides, her expression tight and unreadable. But her eyes flicked to him for just a moment, and he thought he saw something there, a mix of gratitude and fear. Whatever game was being played here, it had just changed. And Rylan knew this wouldn't be the last time he'd have to fight for her. Truth from the mother, the station's grand hall was still being cleaned when Rylan was summoned. Broken chairs, scorched panels, and the faint acrid smell of smoke lingered in the air. But this time, the guards didn't lead him to the meeting room. They took him to the envoy's private quarters. The door slid open to a dimly lit space filled with soft, flowing fabrics and the faint scent of some alien flower. The girl was asleep on a couch, curled up under a silver blanket. Her small chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, a stark contrast to the chaos from earlier. The envoy stood by the window, her tall frame outlined by the planet's pale light. She didn't turn when she spoke. "You should know the truth, Commander." Rylan stepped inside, the door hissing shut behind him. "I'm listening." She was silent for a moment, as if deciding where to begin. "The bond my daughter feels. For you, it is real. But there is more. She was not yet born when her father died in the war. He was my mate, my protector, and the one who told me stories of the human who saved him on Oris 4. Rylan frowned. "I thought I only rescued civilians." "You did. But among them was my mate. He never forgot your face, your voice." "I never forgot either." Her silver eyes softened. "When my daughter was born, she grew up with those stories. And when she met you, the memories I had passed to her became her own." Rylan felt the weight of her words. "So she knew me before she ever saw me." The envoy nodded slowly. "But now that Bond has been seen in public, you are a target. She is more than my child. She is heir to my title. If she were taken, the peace between our people would shatter. And those who oppose this treaty would use her connection to you as a weapon. Raylan glanced at the sleeping girl. Her face was calm, innocent. But the thought of masked mercenaries dragging her away made his jaw tighten. The envoy's voice dropped. The attack today was not the last. They will come again. And each time, they will be closer to succeeding. You're asking me to protect her, Raylan said. I am telling you, the envoy replied, finally turning to face him, that without you, she will not survive what is coming. Raylan met her gaze. Then I stay with her, no matter what it takes. For the first time, the envoy allowed the smallest hint of a smile. Then perhaps there is hope for these talks after all. The promise the final day of negotiations began under heavy guard. Extra-human security teams lined the walls, and Viren honor guards stood shoulder to shoulder at the doors. The grand hall felt different, now less like a place of peace, more like the center of a storm. Raylan stood at his post near the human delegation, his eyes scanning every shadow, every twitch of movement. Across the room, the girl sat beside her mother, her silver hair catching the light, her violet eyes flicking to him every so often. Each time, he gave her the smallest nod. The talks dragged on for hours. Words were careful, movements even more so. Then, halfway through the afternoon session, the lights flickered. Every instinct in Raylan's body went on high alert. The first explosion was small. Pressure popped from the ventilation system overhead. It was enough to scatter dust and make the room tense. The second was sharper, closer-hidden charges breaching a sidewall. Smoke poured in. Figures emerged from the haze, masked and armed, moving with purpose. They didn't fire randomly. They moved straight for the girl. Raylan was already running. One mercenary lunged toward her, but Raylan slammed into him, driving him back into a column. Another reached for her arm. Raylan grabbed his wrist, twisting hard until the weapon clattered to the floor. The girl ducked under the table, clutching the folds of her tunic. Go! Raylan barked to the envoy, who shielded her daughter as they moved toward the rear exit. But the attackers weren't giving up. One of them broke through the guards and raised a weapon toward the fleeing pair. Raylan didn't think. He dove forward, knocking the barrel upward as it fired. The bolt scorched the ceiling, and in the same motion, he drove his fist into the mercenary's chest, sending him sprawling. Security forces surged in from the hall, driving the attackers back. The last of them retreated into the smoke, disappearing as quickly as they'd come. When the hall was finally secure, the envoy stood before the human delegation. Her robes were singed, her breathing quick, but her voice was steady. This treaty will be signed, she said, and it will stand, not in fear, but in trust. She turned to Raylan, and for a moment, the formal mask slipped. Gratitude shone in her eyes. The girl stepped forward, her small hand reaching for his. We're safe now, because you came back. Raylan crouched to meet her gaze. I told you before, he said, his voice calm but certain. I always come back. She smiled small, but certain, and for the first time since the talks began, the hall felt lighter. The treaty was signed within the hour. History would remember the politics and the speeches. But for Raylan, the memory that would stay with him was simpler. The look in a little alien girl's eyes when she knew, without a doubt, that he would keep his promise. The unexpected arrival. The grand hall of the Helios station was built to impress. Its ceiling arched high above, covered in shifting light panels that mimicked a slow sunrise. The floor was polished to a mirror shine, and the air smelled faintly of clean metal and fresh ion filters. It was the kind of place where every step echoed, and every voice carried. Commander Raylan stood at the edge of the human delegation, hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't here to speak or negotiate. He was here to watch, to keep an eye on the proceedings, and make sure nothing disrupted the fragile peace talks between Earth and the Viren Empire. His eyes scanned the hall slowly, noting every guard, every exit, every flicker of movement. The chatter in the room softened as the side doors hissed open. A pair of tall Viren honor guards entered first, their armor gleaming silver in the artificial light. Behind them came a woman taller than most humans, her skin a smooth metallic silver that seemed to ripple faintly with each step. Draped in flowing robes of deep blue and gold, she moved with a kind of grace that made everyone else in the room seem clumsy. This was High Envoy Lorene, leader of the Viren delegation, but it wasn't the envoy who drew the breath from the room. Walking just a step behind her was a small figure half her height, dressed in a simple cream-colored tunic. The child's skin held the same silver sheen, but her large violet eyes seemed almost too big for her delicate face. She looked around the hall with open curiosity, her gaze moving over the human delegation without hesitation, until she saw Rylan. She stopped mid-step. The envoy glanced down at her daughter, then followed her gaze toward the human security line. The little girl's eyes locked onto Rylan's, and in that moment it was as if the noise of the room faded away. Her lips curved into a small smile. She raised one slender hand and pointed directly at him. "Mom," she said in clear, perfect Viren, but the translator chips instantly converted into English. "That's him." The effect was instant. Conversations died. The human delegation turned to stare at Rylan. The Viren guards shifted uneasily. Even the High Envoy froze, her silvered hands tightening slightly at her sides as she looked from her daughter to the human officer. Rylan blinked, caught off guard by the intensity of the little girl's gaze. He had never seen her before, not in his life. And yet, there was something about the way she looked at him, like she had been waiting for this exact moment. The High Envoy bent down slightly, speaking to her daughter in a low voice. "Whatever," she said, made the girl's smile fade just a little, but her eyes never left Rylan. Then, with a quick flick of her hand, the envoy signaled her guards. "The meeting will begin shortly," she announced, her voice cool and composed. "But I believe we must postpone the opening statements." The Viren delegation withdrew to a private chamber, the girl glancing over her shoulder at Rylan as she left. Her expression was calm, but her eyes, those violet eyes, burned with a strange recognition. Rylan stayed rooted to the spot until the doors closed behind him. "What was that about?" whispered Lieutenant Marin, standing beside him. "I have no idea," Rylan said quietly. And he meant it, but the truth was, something about the girl's voice had struck a chord deep inside him. The way she said, "That's him," it wasn't surprise. It was certainty. He felt the weight of several stares from both his own people and the alien guards stationed around the hall. His role was to be invisible, a silent protector in the background. Now, thanks to a single sentence from a child, every pair of eyes seemed locked on him. Before he could even take a step toward the exit, 2 Viren guards approached. Their movements were polite, but unmistakably firm. "Commander Rylan," one of them said, his tone even. "The High Envoy requests your presence, now." Rylan hesitated for a moment. He glanced toward Captain Darren, the leader of the human delegation, who gave him a single nod. The guards led him through a series of long, curved corridors lined with intricate wall carvings that shimmered faintly under the lights. The deeper they went, the quieter it became, until all Rylan could hear was the sound of his own footsteps and the faint hum of the station's life support systems. Finally, they stopped in front of a tall, gold-trimmed door. One guard pressed a panel, and the door slid open with a hiss. Inside was a smaller chamber, lit warmly instead of with the cold blue-white of the main hall. The High Envoy stood near a low table, her robes arranged neatly as she turned to face Him. The little girl was seated beside her, legs folded under her, eyes fixed on him the moment he entered. The envoy studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You may not remember her," she said slowly, "but she remembers you?" Raylan's brow furrowed. "We've never met." The girl tilted her head. "You carried me," she said softly. Her words sent a strange shiver down Ryland's spine. The envoy's eyes narrowed slightly. "Sit, Commander. We have much to discuss." And for the first time since the talks began, Ryland realized that whatever had just happened in that hall was going to change everything. Questions with no answers. The chamber was quiet, almost too quiet. The hum of the ventilation was soft, and the faint scent of something floral hung in the air. Ryland sat across from the high envoy at the low table, his posture straight, but his mind turning in circles. The little alien girl sat to the envoy's left, her small hands resting neatly in her lap, her violet eyes never leaving him. "You saved her," the envoy said without preamble. Her voice was calm, but there was weight behind it, like every word was a test. Ryland shook his head slightly. "I don't recall ever meeting her. I've never been in direct contact with any Verain children." The envoy's gaze sharpened. "Do you remember the Vera rescue?" He paused. The name stirred something in him. "You mean the evacuation on Orisfor? That was years ago." "Yes," the envoy replied. "A moonquake collapsed one of our refugee compounds. You were part of the human rescue team." Ryland nodded slowly. "I was there, yes. We pulled dozens out from the rubble. I don't remember a child like her, though." The girl leaned forward slightly. Her voice was soft, but the translator chip carried it clearly into his ear. "You carried me." He looked at her, searching for any sign this was some sort of trick. But her eyes, those deep violet eyes, held no deceit. They were steady and sure, as if the memory for her was as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. She continued, "It was dark. You told me to close my eyes and not be afraid. Your arm was bleeding." Raylan felt his jaw tighten. He had been injured that day by a piece of falling metal while pulling a survivor out. It wasn't something recorded in any report. How would she know that? He asked quietly, almost to himself. The envoy's expression softened just a fraction. "Among my people, there is something called soul recognition. When one of us experiences deep rescue or protection, the memory is anchored. It cannot be erased. The bond remains." Ryland leaned back slightly, trying to process it. "And you're saying she bonded to me?" The envoy nodded. "She never forgot you. Not your face, not your voice. And now she has found you again." The girl smiled faintly. "I told you I'd see you again." The words made something tighten in Ryland's chest. He didn't know why. Before he could respond, the envoy's tone shifted. "This recognition is rare. And in times like these, rare things can be dangerous." "What do you mean?" Ryland asked. She glanced toward the guards at the door before answering. "There are those in my government who do not want this treaty with Earth. If they believe you have influence over my daughter, they may use it against both of us." Ryland folded his arms. "And what do you expect me to do about that?" The envoy met his eyes. "Stay close to her. At least until these talks are complete. If anyone intends harm, you will be the one to stop it." Ryland hesitated. "That's not why I'm here." "It is now," she said simply. The girl's gaze softened. "You kept me safe before," she whispered. "You can do it again." Ryland exhaled slowly. In that moment, he knew this wasn't going to be a normal diplomatic mission. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Whatever had started in that hall was no accident. And somewhere deep down, a part of him already knew this was only the beginning. The bond revealed the next day The talks resumed in the grand hall, but the atmosphere had changed. Whispers followed Rylan now. Both human and Varen delegates glanced his way when they thought he wasn't looking. The little girl seated beside, her mother at the long negotiation table, kept sneaking looks at him, too. During a short recess, the envoy requested Rylan's presence in a smaller, private chamber just off the hall. The guards closed the doors behind them, leaving only the three of them inside. The girl sat cross-legged on a cushioned seat, her small hands folded in her lap, her eyes locked on Rylan with the same steady focus as before. "I remember," she began softly. The dust was thick. It was hard to breathe. "I was under something heavy. I couldn't move." Her words were calm, but the detail in them made Rylan pause. "You came," she continued. "You pulled me out. Your arm was cut, and your face had dirt on it. You told me to close my eyes so I wouldn't see the fire. And then," she smiled faintly, "you carried me." Rylan shifted in his seat. There was no way she could know those things unless she'd been there. He remembered the smell of the burning compound, the metallic taste in the air, the small, fragile weight of someone in his arms. The envoy's voice was quiet but certain. "Soul recognition is not just memory, Commander. It is connection. She feels what she felt then, every